Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you all of my spoilery thoughts while reading Midnight Tides by Stephen Erickson. This is the fifth book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series. Very excited to be bringing you my thoughts on this book. If you haven't seen any of my videos so far, by the way, any of my Malazan videos, then I'll leave the playlist linked in the description. I've done a video for all of the books in this series so far. I am going to structure this video in the same way that I've done the last few videos. I'm going to check in with you at the end of each part. So at the time of filming, I finished part one, and I have to say, I think this book has potential to be my favourite Malazan book so far. However, in terms of my actual enjoyment, my enjoyment hasn't been high so far. I'm obviously going to push through. At this point in the series, I am committed. I am going to finish out the series, probably not before the end of the year. I feel like I'm back reading Gardens of the Moon again. I'm feeling a little bit lost. I feel like I'm following stuff, but it's just not clicking in my brain. And as I've said many times before in previous videos, what I like about this series is those moments where I work something out, I make a connection, something clicks in my brain. I love those feelings, and I think I took it for granted in the previous two books that was happening more frequently, whereas now we're starting again fresh. We're in a new part of the world, we're being introduced to a whole load of new characters, and it's been a lot. I feel like this first part, there's been a lot that has been thrown at me, and I feel like I'm just struggling to keep up. So once again, I have my trusty notebook, so we are going to go through some stuff that I've learned so far, as well as my thoughts on various characters, because I have really enjoyed meeting certain characters. One character in particular that I'd heard about and that loads of people had said is one of their favourite characters in the whole series. So in the prologue, we have this battle between the Teast and the Gachain Chamale. I love it when Stephen Erickson starts a Malazan book way in the past. The last time that properly happened, I think, was with book 3, and I ended up loving book 3. I thought the prologue of book 3 was like, it was one of my favourite prologues. I think I just enjoy feeling the depth of the world. So in this prologue, we have what's called the betrayal, and it's been referred to frequently by various characters, but this was where Skabadri, the god of shadow, betrayed Silchas Ruin, who is one of the sons of Mother Dark and Anamanda Rake's brother. He's not killed though. Instead, he is trapped inside an Azath house, which I think we've actually seen this Azath house now, and something is going on there. I'm assuming that he's trying to break free, but we'll come on to that a little bit later. The majority of the plot is revolving around this political situation between the Ida and the Lethari. So we're seeing both sides, which I like. I like seeing both sides of a conflict, and this gathering is about to happen. Right at the start of the book though, these Lethari ships are found hunting where they're not supposed to be hunting, and the Ida retaliate. There's been some discussion and speculation around why this happened, and maybe the Lethari were trying to incite a war. I really like all the politics. This is why I think this book has potential to become a new favourite, because I love political fantasy. I think I'm just struggling at the moment to grasp all the details, but we have this retaliation that happens, and Troll Sengar, who was one of my favourite characters in the previous book, I love that we're getting his backstory. He is there when the king of his tribe uses some kind of magic to attack these ships, and I don't know whether they realise straight away, but again, there's some discussion around it's not magic from Corald Emmeline, it's not from the Teista Derwarren, it's something else. And there's a scene a little bit later where Trull and some of his brothers go underground, and they're talking about the betrayal and basically saying that maybe what they've been told their whole lives isn't actually the case. One of my favourite things about the book so far has been learning about theatre culture, and especially the family dynamics within the Sengar family. The sibling rivalry rivalry, especially where the youngest brother, I think, is concerned, how it seems like he is going after his elder brother's fiance, and maybe she's encouraging it. Trull is not 100% sure, but he's observing what's happening, and maybe, I can't remember her name, I think it begins with an M, but maybe she has an ulterior motive as well. Maybe she's doing things for her own benefit and like encouraging this guy's obsession with her, because it wasn't there before she got engaged to the eldest brother, I think is called Fia. The youngest brother didn't want to know her, and yeah, I think all of the interactions there have been done like in a really interesting way. The Sengar brothers are being sent on this mission by their king to bring something back for him, and I have a theory based on something that Trull was thinking. He was basically speculating and wondering why he has been chosen, him and his brothers, because Fia, his eldest brother, is this great warrior who is presumably going to lead the army if this war happens. Binadas, the next, I think, brother, he's this fantastic mage, like he's one of the most powerful mages in the tribe. They also have a friend who apparently is a great leader on the seas. So why are they being risked for this mission? It's not an easy mission that they're being sent on. I have a theory that maybe, because we've seen little hints that Fia especially is not 100% on board with the king's plans and what he's trying to do. He seems very power hungry. So I'm wondering, is the king sending them on this mission hoping that they're not going to come back because he's trying to get rid of anyone who could possibly oppose him? We've also had the perspective of Udenas, who is a Lothari slave, and he has been possessed by a wyval, and we've learned that these wyvals are actually Tistandi. I'm going to be honest, his perspective isn't my favourite. I found the dream sequences with him just really confusing, and I don't quite know what's true or not, because there was a point where I think, I can't remember her name, Featherwitch I think is her name, she at one point is in his dream and is saying this is a false vision because she actually has, well, I'm presuming that they're real visions, but she appears in his dream and says you can't trust what is like happening here. There was one point where he was absolutely against helping this wyval with their revenge plan, but then he suddenly seemed to switch and suddenly he's like all for it. His chapters have been the most difficult for me to understand. Like at one point he was sent to retrieve, I think it was like a magical arrowhead. I might have said this before, but I much prefer a hard magic system, and I need to just let it go because I know that the magic system in Malazan is a little bit softer. On the flip side, we are also getting chapters following the Lothari. So we have three brothers. Hull, who was an envoy or an emissary sent to treaty with the surrounding tribes. He thought that he was there just to gather information. Turns out that that information was what was used to conquer them. So he's carrying around a lot of guilt, and he's now part of the party that's going to the gathering. But he's made it very clear that he wants to help the Eda and to push back against the Lothari. Briss is the next brother. He is the king's champion and therefore very central within the politics, at least on the Lothari side. It very much feels like this part of the world is isolated. In fact, I made some notes on this because I think at one point it was explained that this whole area is a colony of the First Empire, and we know that the First Empire was on 7 cities. It ended when these people tried to perform a ritual in order to ascend, but it went horribly wrong. I think we saw that in Dead House Gates in the second book, but within the Lothari culture, they worship an empty hold and an empty throne. We know that hold is an older word for houses, and it would make sense that they would use the older word for the houses because houses, I think, is kind of a more modern term. They seem to use these tiles in order to tell the future, similar to how the Malazans have the deck of dragons. Right at the start of the book, at the beginning of chapter 1, where it is implied specifying the year. It says this takes place 1 year before the Lothari 7th closure, which it then mentions the Lothari believe whoever is ruling at the time of the 7th closure will be the first emperor reborn. In the last book, House of Chains, I think actually it was Trull who was talking to Onrak, I think is his name, about the first emperor and how maybe he's linked to the Hounds of Darkness. That's all I can really remember about him. But it's all really interesting how, even though this book does feel like almost a standalone within the world, there's still those links to what we've learnt about the world so far. The final character that I wanted to talk about is Tahol. I love Tahol. He's my favourite character after Trull. I think that he is the comedic relief. Some of his one-liners have made me laugh out loud, and I know that Tahol and Bug are regularly talked about within the community as being people's favourite characters. Like, some people I've seen have said that Tahol and Bug are some of their favourite characters within the Malazan series. So as soon as I saw his name, I thought, okay, I'm sat, I'm prepared, and yeah, I really like his character. So what I gather he is trying to do is he's come up with a plan with these 3 women to bankrupt Lothar. He's also hired this woman, who I think is a type of zombie, to help him with this plan. She's meant to steal something from this guy that Tahol seems to have a rivalry with. I can't remember his name. I think it begins with a G. The only other thing I've got written down is that there are 5 Toblakai trapped in the Azath house, and there's this little girl who I think is also not a ghost, a zombie I think is the best term to use, but she can feel that something is happening with this Azath house. Some beings are trying to break free. So yeah, I think that's a good place to end this update, because I feel like I've been talking for a while and it is quite warm in this room. I have had the window open, so apologies if you can hear the rain. It's raining and it's grey and it's dark and it's miserable outside, but it's also really humid, so I've been trying to get a breeze in this room. But yeah, I will check in with you once I'm at the end of part 2, which is going to be around the halfway point. I have reached the end of part 2 in Midnight Tides already. I last spoke to you on Saturday and it's now Tuesday, so I'm reading this book way quicker than I think I've read any other Malazan book. Happy to say I did enjoy part 2 a lot more than part 1. I think I just needed to give myself time to get to know the characters, and I feel like I've done that now. So lots happened in this second part. I feel like the plot is developing quite quickly. I made some assumptions that I think Stephen Erikson wanted me to make these assumptions. I assumed, because we've already met Trull in the previous book, the start of House of Chains literally opens with him being shorn by his brothers. It says specifically his brothers, so that makes me think certain things are going to happen in this book. But I assumed that it was the king Hanan Mozag, I think is his name. I assumed that he was going to become some kind of tyrant and that he was in league with the Crimson God, which is half true. That's why he sent Trull and his brothers off to retrieve this sword. But the crippled god had other plans because he wasn't happy with Hanan Mozag's plans or motivations. The crippled god wants war, and Hanan Mozag wanted the sword for protection rather than to incite a war. So now we have Rulad, the youngest brother. He's become the emperor. I think that Trull's brothers, other than Rulad, his other brothers, so Binadas and Fia, I think they're going to turn against Trull. Trull has already been quite outspoken about what's happening and the direction that Rulad wants to take the Eda. Fia in particular is very loyal and he believes in obeying without question. I don't think he's the type to challenge authority, so I think that he's going to turn against Trull, and that's what's going to happen, and that's how we get to the place where Trull is at in the previous book. Very much enjoying the Ida storyline, and I'm really curious to see what direction that plot goes in. There's some interesting stuff as well happening in Lothari. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. There are a lot of names in this particular book. There's also characters who have similar names, and it's really confusing me. In Lothari, we have learned that the Azath house has, I think it's died now. So the beings that are buried there are potentially going to break free. It did mention, and this is where I'm a little bit confused. So the little girl is talking about someone, her uncle, that she's been speaking to that's buried in the Azath house. And she also mentions dragons. So I think that could be Silchas Ruin, who we know was buried there. It also mentions that someone is coming to help, but I don't know who. There was a lot of stuff to do with the dragon politics in this section, and my boyfriend actually drew me a diagram. In fact, I'll see if I can take a picture and put it on the screen, or I'll recreate it in Photoshop and I'll put it on the screen. But yeah, I was getting really confused. I assumed, because this one dragon called Tiam keeps being mentioned, and I assumed that was Mother Dark, but I don't think that's the case. I think she's someone completely different. Some new characters that have been mentioned include Menador, Sokol, and Kando. I can't read my partner's writing. And then Shalala Law, who I think is also buried in the Azath house, and she is the mother of Lady Envy and Sister Spite, who we met in Memories of Ice. I'm trying to remember how Lady Envy's story in Memories of Ice ended, because I'm sure at the end of Memories of Ice there was an Ida who was found on the beach in Genabakis. I can't remember where her storyline left off. Maybe I should go back and have a look if it's not addressed in this book. But yeah, the Ida have been mentioned several times throughout this series so far, including in the Nason. There was a ship that the Ida were on, and they'd reanimated some Teast Andy to row that ship until Karsa came along and slayed them all. Interested to see how the Ida end up in the Nascent, because that's where Trull was in House of Chains. Something is happening in Tahol's perspective as well. There was a part where he was asking Shirk and Ulalas about the canal. Then he also asks his brother to dig out some records of people who have gone missing recently. It seems like he suspects that people are going missing, but I don't know how that is going to tie into everything. It seems like we have these two plots, and obviously they're linked in a way because of the politics. I'm not sure how the Azath house and what's happening there, how that's going to intersect with the Ida. The one thing I'm not loving on the Lothari side is we have so many female characters who, to me, it seems like their only personality trait, or their main personality trait, is that they're horny. And it's just not funny to me. Like, the humour surrounding that, I'm not I'm not enjoying it. That was the only negative that I had written down. Otherwise, yeah, there was a really cool scene with Cedar, I think is the character's name, the High Mage of Lether. And Cedar is basically hanging from the ceiling, trying to do this experiment to prove that the Earth is round, even though the First Empire had circumnavigated the globe at some point, and so they'd already proved it, but he is just a bit wacky, and I like him. There was some really interesting stuff about the world, how he was talking about the continents all used to be connected, similar to our world. And I don't know whether all of this stuff is going to become relevant at some point, or whether it's just like a cool little detail that Stephen Erikson chose to include. But yeah, I really liked that part. Bryce is struggling at the moment because he's being torn between both sides. He doesn't want to know. He doesn't want to be caught up in the politics. He just wants to do his job and be left alone, which honestly is relatable. So I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about in this update. Oh, I did also like the scene where the Lothari delegation showed up to see the Ida. I thought that was going to be another Red Wedding situation, just because of the way that the tension seemed to be building. But yeah, I'm really excited to see how the politics continue to develop in this next part. I have reached the end of part 3 in Midnight Tides. According to my Kindle, I have about 25% left to go, and it's going to take me around 4 hours. So I should be able to get through the rest of this at some point this weekend. But obviously I wanted to check in with you first with some thoughts, and I am really liking this. I don't want to go into too much detail on the plot because there's a lot that's happening and there's no way I would remember to talk about everything, but we basically have these two sides pitched against each other, and neither side is really one that you want to root for. Like, on the one side we have this capitalist society where everything revolves around money and wealth, but then on the flip side we have this dictatorship, and Trull seems to be the only character, at least among the Eda, who is seeing sense, and he even has a conversation with Fear at one point to say that their culture is what has led to this situation because they've never questioned authority. And I just really like Trull. He's someone that I really empathise with. There was a whole part where he was so desperate to save this demon's life, and that just made me feel really sad. How these demons were pulled into this world that is not their own and forced to fight. It was quite emotional, and I just really like Trull, okay? Trull is my favourite character in the whole of this series so far. I can't stand Rulad, and I know that he's not exactly someone that we're meant to like, but ever since the beginning when he was first introduced, there was something about his personality that gave off entitled vibes. I guess you could empathise with his situation. He's the youngest brother, he feels this need to big himself up and prove his worth, but I just don't have the patience for characters like that. With the other brothers, as I'm going to call them, let's talk about Hull first, because I think he's a very tragic character when he decides to side with the Eda because he sees them as the lesser of two evils. I thought that was a really understandable decision, but also it was really sad how he's been pushed to make that decision based on how he was treated by his own government or monarchy. I like that we've seen a little more of Bryce and Hull's relationship as well, how when Bryce realises that Hull's betrayal is going to impact on them and that they're going to be at risk of assassins, he immediately goes to Hull to warn him, and he says, I'm going to get you some bodyguards. Hull makes a joke at that point saying, oh, I'll be fine, I've got Bug to look out for me. It's played off as a joke, but I don't think it's a joke because there's something going on with Bug. He is definitely not who he appears. He has all of this knowledge that he really shouldn't have. I don't know whether he's got some kind of magic or whether he's from a different part of the world, but something is going on there. I've also written down who is Kettle because we've learned that she's somehow linked to the Nameless Ones, which we know is the cult or organisation who are linked to the Azath houses. But then there's also a link to the Forkrul Assail, who we've only heard about in bits. So yeah, not sure what's going on there. Seren is now with the Crimson Guard, who we've learned that their prince was kicked off his throne by Kellenvad. There was a really interesting part actually where Seren says, wow, you must be from really far away because I've never heard of this Kellenvad. I really liked that line. But yeah, they are now trying to get their prince back on his throne. Could it be like kicked out of a hold actually, or a house? I'm just thinking now actually, maybe when they say that he was kicked off his throne, they mean like a throne within something, like one of the holds or the houses. I might have got that wrong. But there's also another really interesting part where Hanan Mozag mentions other realms. They don't have the words to say Warrens, but he mentions there are other realms where there are Eda. He even mentions that they're going to build ships and enslave these Tistandi that are also within these Warrens, and they mention flooding the Warrens to make it easier for them to travel between them, and it's all coming together now. Based on the pacing, I was a little bit nervous that we weren't even gonna get to the point where Trull is being shorn, but I think it's all coming close circle now, and I'm really excited to see how the book ends. So I have now finished Midnight Tides by Stephen Erikson, the 5th book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, and I think this is my favourite book in the series so far. It's definitely up there. Previously I was saying that Memories of Ice was my favourite book in the series, but I think this has matched it, if not surpassed it it because I preferred the ending to this. I think it was a lot more consistent the whole way through. Obviously, I mentioned this in the beginning, it took a lot of brain power for me to get my head around all of the new characters and this new area of the world, but once I was in it, I was in it. Compared to Memories of Ice, I think there were parts of that book where I was a little bit bored, whereas I didn't really find that with this book. I think I'm still gonna give this a 4 stars rather than a 5. There were some stuff that I really liked, but there were some issues as well. So we're gonna get into it. I have made some notes, which I'm going to get up now. So first thing I realised about this particular book, there were a lot more characters that I felt emotions for. There are a lot more characters that I felt connected with, and the main reason, I've said this in previous videos, but the main reason why I think this isn't quite a 5-star series for me is because the way that Steven Erikson writes characters doesn't always work for me. I think there's too much ambiguity there, and if I'm in a character's perspective, I don't want to be confused about their actions. I don't want to be speculating on why they're thinking certain things or doing certain things. I want it to be clearer. Otherwise, I don't feel connected to those characters. So that's the main reason why up until this point, I think none of the books have really given me that 5-star feeling. I did think about giving this 5 stars, but I feel like I had too many issues with it. With the characters though, I have already talked about this. I loved Trull as a character. I found him really interesting in the previous book. I just really enjoyed getting to know the Ida culture. I think that was very well realised. Rulad's character as well, I thought was so interesting. I think he has one of the most interesting character arcs in this entire series so far. There was a point towards the end where he says all he wanted from his brothers was for them to take him seriously and for them to treat him with respect. I can't remember the exact wording, but I think he said something to imply that he wanted them to treat him like an adult. And I'm not gonna lie, my reaction was, well, maybe if you acted like an adult, then they'd respect you a bit more, but I think that's just my bias being an older sibling. If you don't know, I have one older sister and 2 younger siblings. So even though I found Rulad's perspective on that quite frustrating, I could see what Steven Erikson was trying to show with his character, and I think the brotherly relationships in this particular book were done so well. I loved that we also got Fia's perspective towards the end, how it took him a little bit longer to come to the same conclusions that Trull had already come to. It was heartbreaking in a way, seeing Rulad go through this never-ending cycle of being resurrected and how that impacted on his mental health, how the crippled god was influencing him and how worn down he felt. Like, for his brothers to see him going through that, like, that must have been unbelievably difficult. And I think, yeah, getting Fia's perspective towards the end, even just briefly, really appreciated that, and I am so interested to see where he pops up again. I'm assuming this isn't the end for these characters. I do wish we'd had that full circle moment of seeing Trull being shorn. I don't know whether that's gonna come in a future book because we have already seen it, and I think based on the ending to this, you can kind of guess why Trull was shorn. Obviously it ends with him and Fia going their separate ways, and Trull, I don't know whether it's a case of he goes back to his brother and Rulad immediately says, we're taking you to the Nason. I don't know whether there's stuff that comes in between the ending of this book and that. That final scene though in, I'm going to call it the throne room. I think the official name is the Eternal Domicile, but that entire scene in the throne room I thought was really intense, and especially the not knowing what was going to happen. Like, I didn't know whether the Ida were going to succeed or whether Cedar and the Lothari were going to be able to hold them back. I was expecting something to happen, and when Trull picks up his spear and throws it at the Cedar, like, that moment, like, you could just tell he didn't want to do it. You could just tell he did not want to do that, but still a part of him just couldn't let go of what had been ingrained in him, how the Idas believe in obedience. And yeah, I thought that whole scene was so well done. I am also really glad that this didn't end with Fia betraying Trull. I'm glad that they've left on good terms and they might be reunited at some point in the future. There were a couple of reveals towards the end of this, which I'm going to quickly go through, but I didn't think many of the reveals in this were that satisfying. So one of the first reveals that we get is that the Queen's consort, who I think is called Blizzard, I don't know whether that's I've spelt that wrong, but the Queen's consort, it's revealed that he is the god Errant. Up until that point, I didn't really feel anything about that character. To me, he was just a side character. He wasn't anyone that I thought was particularly significant, and so that reveal didn't really do anything for me. I thought, okay, right, I get it. He's a god, and he's someone who potentially is going to be important in later books, but I don't really feel anything in this moment towards this reveal. The bigger reveal, I think, is that Bug is actually Male, the sea god, and we do get a brief chapter with Male and Gothos, the Jagger, right near the beginning. It still didn't click for me that that's who Bug could potentially be, and again, I think it's because we've heard about Male in previous books, but he wasn't a character that we'd seen. He wasn't a character that I really felt anything towards, and so again, that reveal, like, it was cool, but it wasn't like really cool, you know? It wasn't like it happened and I thought, oh my gosh, I should have realised this way sooner. I think as well, because we'd already had that earlier reveal that Blizzard is a god, it just felt a bit repetitive, like, oh look, we have two characters who are actually gods. Male is mentioned quite a lot throughout this book, so maybe I should have made the connection sooner, or at least considered it as a possibility. For example, there's that chamber or that place where gods who are forgotten are sent, and it was set up by Male and then he kind of abandoned it, but there's a guardian there who has now taken Bryce there to become a second guardian, and Bryce's memories of these gods' true names was transferred to Hull. So much was happening. But yeah, I think this is a book that I would probably appreciate more on reread. It had a lot that I love in fantasy, especially the politics. Loved the politics, loved seeing the differences between these two cultures and everything to do with that, and there were some really memorable and iconic characters in this. Also, the humour generally worked for me a little better than in previous books. I still didn't love the sexual humour. Some of the humour in this as well was just a little bit gross, and I am not someone who likes gross humour. So anyway, I forgot to mention the scene where Trull realises that he's in love with Seren. That to me came out of nowhere. It felt so awkward and forced, and I'm assuming that there's going to be a romance between the two of them at some point in the future. I'm assuming that's the setup for that, and yeah, I've said this before, I don't love the way that Stephen Erikson writes romance, but because it's such a small part of the series, I think I can get past it. I am very aware that in my last reading vlog I talked about doing a discussion video with my partner. That is still in the plan. We've been really struggling to find the time to film because we can only really film at a weekend, and we have had some very hot weather in the UK recently, so it's been a struggle to find a day where it's a reasonable temperature and where we're both free to film for a few hours. So that will be coming. I think it's actually better to film that video now that we've finished at Midnight Tides, because we're halfway through the books of The Fallen. So yeah, that will hopefully be coming at some point over the summer. As for when I'm going to be picking up at book 6, I think we're going to aim for end of August, possibly the start of September. I'm trying to leave around a month in between books because I don't want to burn myself out, but I also don't want to leave it too long so that I'm forgetting stuff. So yeah, hopefully the next book will be read at some point towards the end of August or start of September, and my reading vlog will be live within like a week or two of that. But I'm going to stop rambling. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Click subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me, but otherwise I will see you next time. Bye.